He opened his eyes. It was bright daylight. He was still lying on the ground. The birds were singing somewhere above him. In the distance he could hear the rumble of an army on the move. He tried to lift his head, but the movement caused the pain again, and he lay back and stared at the sky. The blue was almost clear. Only a thin haze remained. The battle must have ended long ago. Was he still lying where he'd fallen, he wondered. He turned his head to the side. Some distance from him, another red-clad soldier lay on the ground, unmoving. Was he alive or dead? Soon they'd come with a stretcher. The soldier who bent over him, was it last night? Must have left a marker. He'd be taken to hospital and then be sent back to England. He'd have leave. He hoped they'd send him home in time to see his grandfather once more. The old earl was the only family he had left. Oh, there were aunts and uncles and all sorts of cousins, close and distant. But it was grandfather who had been his family after his father had died. He closed his eyes, remembering his dream. Yes, he would very much like to take grandfather's hand in his once more. He tried to recapture the dream, to see his grandfather's face. The only one left in the world he loved. Except Edwina, of course. But her face eluded him too. Beautiful Edwina Manning. It was unbelievable that she still waited for him. Perhaps he was lucky to have been wounded. On this leave he would marry her. She was old enough now to be able to cope with life as a soldier's wife. The hours passed unbearably slowly. The rumble seemed to grow farther and farther away. Could he have been overlooked? Could the soldier who had found him have forgotten to leave a marker? He opened his mouth to shout, but his throat was so parched that he could only croak. The effort left him weak and trembling, and he lay unmoving in quiet despair. Then a new sound reached his ears. Men were marching somewhere above him, from the north. Slowly, wincing with pain, he raised himself on his elbow and looked up the mountainside. In the distance he could see a blue-clad army on the move. It couldn't be Marshal Victor's defeated army. They had moved away in the opposite direction. It was either Soult or Ney, or both, coming through the pass at Banished. At last he understood. Sir Arthur, learning of the movement of some or all of Napoleon's army in Spain, must have realized the danger of advancing on Madrid, or even remaining here at Talavera, and had been forced to fall back to the south. The British army would have had to cross the river in haste. They had had to leave the wounded behind. Captain Thorne had been an officer long enough to know that such occurrences were not uncommon. Despite the gloom which enveloped him, he felt no resentment at Sir Arthur's action. Every soldier knows that, at certain times, he must be on his own. That time had come to him now. What he had to do was to examine his wounds and determine how he could move on his own. Move he must, if he were ever to find help and eventually to make his way back to London, to his grandfather, to Edwina, to love, to friends, to peace. Painfully, he lifted himself on both elbows and looked down at his left leg, which seemed to be the source of the most painful of the sensations his body had suffered. What he saw caused the blood to drain from his cheeks and a black cloud to settle over him. But before he fell back to unconsciousness, he realized that he could never go back to London. His life in London, his career in the army, his marriage to Edwina, all that was over, irrevocably over.